They say silence has its own sound out here. On the far side of the prairie, when the sun begins to fall and the air turns gold, the land breathes in slow, patient sighs, as if it remembers every footstep that ever crossed it. That evening, I was riding back from the creek, dust clinging to my boots and the smell of horse sweat on the wind. My name's Eli Turner, though most folks in Briar Hollow hardly remember it. Out here, a man can live 10 miles from another and still feel like he's on the wrong side of the world. The prairie doesn't speak much, but when it does, it whispers through the grass, low and restless, like an old woman praying under her breath. I'd been living quiet for near 6 years then. My hands worked the same chores each day, mending fences, feeding Ash, brushing the same tired mule I called family. The barn creaked when the wind turned north, and the well water always carried a taste of iron. I had no wife, no kin, no letters coming in the post. War had taken care of all that. It left me with a bad knee, a Bible I no longer opened, and a silence that followed me like a dog that wouldn't go home. That night, I remember the light was strange, not dusk yet, not day anymore. The kind of in-between hour when ghosts get curious. The horizon bled orange and purple, and the grass waved like an ocean of tired soldiers bowing their heads. That's when I saw him. A small figure curled by the side of the wagon road, half hidden behind a patch of sagebrush. At first, I thought it was a coyote, or worse, a corpse. But as I drew closer, I saw a hand move. Thin, trembling. He was a boy, no more than 10 or 11, skin cracked by sun, ribs showing through a torn hide shirt. His lips were dry, eyes half open but unfocused. His hair was matted with dust, and his little fingers clutched something, a beaded string, maybe a charm. I stopped Ash, slid from the saddle, and crouched beside him. His breath came in small, fragile gasps. He whispered something, words I couldn't catch, soft and foreign, floating like wind over stones. For a long moment, I just stared. There are moments a man's heart argues with his head, and this was one. I knew what folks would say. Don't get involved, Eli. Not your fight. Not your kind. But I'd seen hunger before. The kind that eats through pride first, then through flesh. And whatever he was, white, red, ghost, or angel, he was just a child lying in the dust, trying not to die alone. So I lifted him, careful as I could. He was light as straw, his head falling against my shoulder. I could feel the heat of fever through his skin. Ash snorted softly when I swung back into the saddle, the boy limp in my arms. The sky was darkening fast, that thin strip of gold giving way to deep indigo. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, long and lonely. By the time I reached the barn, night had settled thick around the fields. The stars looked close enough to touch. I laid the boy on a pile of old quilts near the stove. His eyes fluttered, wild with fever. He tried to sit up, muttering something in his own tongue, fear flashing across his face. Easy now, I murmured. My voice felt strange. I hadn't spoken to another soul in weeks. Ain't gonna hurt you, boy. Just rest. He didn't understand, but something in my tone must have reached him. His breathing slowed. I lit the lantern, the flame painting the walls gold and amber. The barn smelled of hay, wood smoke, and old horses. Not much of a home, but it was shelter. I boiled water on the stove, crushed some dried herbs I kept for fever, and fed him what little broth I had. He drank slow, hands shaking, eyes darting around like a frightened bird. He had the look of the plains in him, that proud, sharp grace you see in hawks and running deer, a spirit too wild for walls. When the worst of the shivering passed, he fell asleep, his small hand resting on the beaded string he carried. I knelt beside him, listening to the wind rattle through the barn boards. Funny thing, that sound. I'd grown used to it being empty. But that night, it sounded almost like breath, like the place itself was alive again. I sat there long after the fire burned low. Something about him stirred memories I'd buried deep. A flash of my own boy's face, freckles across his nose, the way he'd run across our old farm back in Tennessee before the war took everything. I'd built my silence like a wall after that. But walls don't stop ghosts. They just echo them louder. When dawn came, pale and thin, I found the boy staring at me, wide-eyed, still weak but watching. The morning light fell across his face, soft as mercy. He flinched when I moved closer, so I slowed down, spoke gentle. You're safe here, little one. Ain't nobody gonna harm you." He didn't answer, just stared at the cross hanging by the window, an old silver thing I hadn't touched in years. His gaze lingered on it, then he turned his eyes back to me. Slowly, he reached for his necklace, a thin leather cord strung with tiny colored beads, and pulled one loose. He held it out to me. I hesitated, not knowing if it was a thank you or something sacred I wasn't meant to touch. But he pressed into my palm, his fingers shaking. A gift. For a moment, neither of us moved. The wind slipped under the barn door and carried the scent of rain. I felt something shift inside me, quiet but real. Maybe kindness doesn't need a language. Maybe hearts know each other before words ever do. I tied the bead around the strap of my old watch, close to my wrist. The boy's eyes softened. He whispered a single word, Tohi, or something like it. I didn't know what it meant then, but I would later. He slept again soon after, breathing slow and steady. Outside, the sky was waking, the first light of morning spilling across the land like spilled honey. I stepped out to fetch water, and as I looked east, I saw the faint outline of distant smoke, thin trails rising from the far hills. Tribal land, maybe, or maybe just the wind playing tricks. Either way, something told me that peace was a fragile thing, and I'd just touched its edge. I walked back inside and sat beside the boy again. His chest rose and fell gently, a rhythm that felt like a prayer. The dog, old Jasper, came padding in, tail wagging low. He sniffed the boy once, then curled up nearby as if he already knew he was one of us now. I remember smiling, a rare thing that, when I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed of open plains and thunderclouds, of children laughing in tall grass, and of a time when men didn't draw lines on the earth to decide who deserved to live. Morning broke soft and gold. The boy was still asleep, a faint color returning to his cheeks. I poured him some water, whispered a quiet thanks to no one in particular, and looked out through the barn door. The world seemed still for a breath, caught between peace and something coming. And then, far off, so faint it could have been my imagination, came the low hum of hooves against the earth. Many hooves. I told myself it was nothing, just cattle, just wind. But deep down, the land was already warning me. It always does, if you know how to listen. By the time the sun lifted high enough to burn the mist away, I could see them. A shimmer on the horizon, dark dots moving, steady, and wide across the hills. Riders. And the boy, still sleeping, whispered in his dreams. The same word again, soft as a prayer carried by the wind. Tohi. I didn't know then what was coming, only that kindness has its cost. But if I had to choose again, I'd still have lifted that boy from the dust. Because some souls you save not for heaven's sake, but just to keep the world human for one more night. Because some souls you save not for heaven's sake, but just to keep the world human for one more night. The next morning came pale and uneasy, the kind of dawn that hides its light behind thin clouds, unsure if the world deserves another day. I woke to the sound of wind scraping against the barn roof. The boy was still sleeping, his breath even, his fever easing. Beside him lay the little dog, faithful Jasper, nose twitching at dreams of rabbits or ghosts. The bead he'd given me caught the first shimmer of light through the cracks in the boards, red and gold, colors of both warning and promise. I stepped outside to fetch water from the well. The world felt too still. Even the crows were quiet. Then I heard it. Far off, beyond the ridges, came a sound that didn't belong to the morning, low and steady, like the heart of the earth itself had started to beat. Hooves. Not one, not a few, many. They moved with the rhythm of purpose, too measured for wild mustangs, too united for chance. I stood there a long while, the rope of the bucket still in my hand, watching the line of the hills tremble beneath the rising sun. And then I saw them. First a shimmer, dust lifting against the light. Then figures, dark, distant many. The horizon rippled like a mirage as they drew nearer, row upon row. Riders. I felt my chest tighten. My first thought went to the boy. The second, to my rifle hanging above the door. But I didn't move. Something deeper than fear kept me rooted there. They came slowly, like a tide rolling across the land, proud, painted, faces unreadable. There must have been 100 at least, maybe more, moving as one body. The sun caught the edges of their spears and turned them into fire. The child in my barn, he was one of theirs. That much I knew. And now, they'd come for him. I could have hidden. I could have saddled Ash and ridden out toward town. But running never did suit me much. Besides, the boy was still fevered, helpless. So I did what I knew best. I stayed. By the time the first riders reached the fence line, my breath had slowed to match the rhythm of their horses. The lead figure broke away, a tall man, straight-backed, his hair streaked with gray, eagle feathers swaying in the wind. He didn't shout. He didn't raise a weapon. He only looked at me, long and steady, like he could see straight through my bones. Behind him, the others waited in silence, their faces painted in deep ochres and blacks. The morning sun turned their outlines gold. I lifted my hand, slow, open, the old sign of peace. He didn't return it, but he didn't move to strike either. A few of the younger riders fanned out, circling wide around the barn, eyes sharp. I could feel their suspicion like heat on my neck. Then, from inside, a soft sound, the boy's cough. The tall man's eyes shifted toward the sound, and for a heartbeat, everything else vanished. I saw the pain flicker there, brief, raw, unmistakable. He kicked his horse once, moved closer, stopped only a few yards from me. His horse's breath steamed in the cold. He spoke then, low, firm, the words broken by accent, but clear enough. "Child." I nodded. Inside, sick but alive. He studied my face, then dismounted, moving with the quiet authority of a man who carries both sorrow and pride in equal measure. He walked past me without another word. His warriors tensed, hands on reins, but he lifted a hand and they held still. I followed him into the barn. The boy stirred at the sound, his small body tense until his eyes found the man. Then he whispered something, that same word again, Tohi. The man dropped to his knees beside him, pressing a weathered hand to the child's face. His lips trembled just once. That was all I needed to see. He looked up at me then. There were no words for what passed between us, just the understanding of two men who'd both lost too much, and who both knew what mercy costs. He nodded once, slow, deep, a gesture that felt like a prayer. Then he stood, turned, and walked back outside. When he stepped into the light again, a murmur rippled through the riders. He raised his hand, a command. Every horse stilled, every weapon lowered. And then, as if the land itself exhaled, they dismounted, hundreds of them, in perfect silence. From the ridge above, I saw movement. Men from Briar Hollow, maybe a dozen or so, riding hard with rifles slung across their backs. Fear travels fast in small towns, faster than mercy ever does. They must have seen the riders from the hills and figured war had come to their doorstep. I felt my stomach drop. I walked forward, out into the open, my hands raised. The chief, for that's what he was, I could feel it, followed my gaze toward the approaching dust cloud. The town men slowed when they saw us, confusion breaking through their bravado. I could see faces I knew, Caleb Finch, the blacksmith, old Mayor Hensley clutching a pistol he probably hadn't fired in years. They shouted something I couldn't make out, the wind stealing their words. But I knew that tone. It was the sound of men who'd already decided who was to blame. The chief's warriors shifted uneasily, eyes narrowing, hands brushing against the hafts of their spears. I could feel the line being drawn in the dust between us. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and the prairie would drink blood before noon. I stepped forward, heart pounding but steady. "This ain't what you think," I called out, my voice carrying across the fields. "There's a sick child here, one of theirs. I found him dying. That's all." The men didn't lower their guns. Caleb spat. "You gone crazy, Eli? They could be setting you up. You can't trust." "Enough." I didn't raise my voice, but it cut through the air like a whip. "You can shoot me if you want, but you'll have to do it while I'm standing in front of that barn." A silence fell that felt heavier than sound. The chief turned to me, something like respect flickering behind the calm mask of his face. Then he lifted his own hand, palm open to the town men, a sign of peace. For a long time, no one moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then, as if some invisible thread had loosened, the chief lowered his arm. His warriors followed. One by one, the rifles in the distance began to dip toward the ground. The danger hadn't passed, but something fragile had been born in that silence. A kind of truce, unspoken, uncertain, but real. The chief turned back to me. He spoke again, this time more softly. "You held blood of my blood," he said. "We remember." He pointed toward the hills. "We take him home." I nodded. "He's still weak. Let him rest till sundown." He studied me a moment longer, then placed a hand on my shoulder, a touch that felt both heavy and blessing. His eyes softened. Then he called out something to his people. The words rolled like thunder, and the riders began to move, not away but around. They spread out in a great circle across the fields, dismounting, setting campfires at the edges of my land. It was then I realized they weren't leaving. They were keeping watch. I don't know how long I stood there, watching the smoke from their fires curl into the pale sky. Maybe an hour, maybe a lifetime. Inside, the boy slept peacefully. Jasper lay beside him, tail twitching. Outside, the warriors sang low into the wind, a song of homecoming, maybe, or of thanks. It rose and fell like the heartbeat of the land itself. By nightfall, the town men had gone, muttering and afraid of things they couldn't understand. Only I and the riders remained, bound together by something bigger than fear. When darkness came, I stepped out once more. The chief stood by the largest fire, his face glowing in its orange light. He looked at me and said just one word, "Tohi." I nodded, still unsure what it meant, but feeling it settle into me like warmth after a long winter. The stars came out bright that night, hanging low over the campfires. From a barn, I could hear the soft breathing of the child, alive, safe, and whole. Two worlds had stood staring at each other that morning, and the only thing between them had been one man and a sleeping child. Two worlds had stood staring at each other that morning, and the only thing between them had been one man and a sleeping child. The day that followed was made of quiet sounds, the soft snort of horses, the crackle of firewood, the sigh of prairie wind carrying songs I did not know the meaning of. The warriors stayed through the morning. They didn't trespass, didn't threaten, didn't speak unless they had to. They simply were. It was strange, seeing them there, figures of earth and spirit, painted faces turned toward the horizon like they were listening for something older than time. Inside, the child slept in calm now. The fever had broken, sweat drying on his brow. I laid a cool cloth across his forehead, though I reckoned he didn't need it anymore. His breath was steady, peaceful. For the first time in years, I found myself humming. Just a tune I remembered from long ago. My wife used to hum it when the rain came soft against the window pane. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I missed the sound of my own voice. Outside, I could feel eyes on me. Not hostile, not curious, just watchful. When I stepped out into the light, the chief, the one I now knew as Gray Eagle, was standing a few paces from the barn. His shadow stretched long across the dust. He nodded once when our eyes met. Then he gestured toward the hills, to the great circle of riders who waited silently. I knew what it meant. It was time. I turned back toward the barn. The boy, Little Hawk, I'd learned from their murmurs, was already sitting up, weak but awake. His eyes found mine. No fear there anymore, just trust, the kind that humbles a man more than any sermon. "You're going home," I said softly. "Your people came for you." He didn't answer, but he reached out, small hand brushing against mine for the briefest second. It said more than words ever could. I lifted him into my arms and stepped outside. The air smelled of sage and smoke. The morning had turned to noon, sunlight falling in broken pieces across the campfires. The chief watched as I carried the boy toward him. Every step felt heavier than the one before, not because the child weighed much, but because something in my heart did. When I reached the chief, I stopped. We stood there, two men from worlds that had never trusted each other, holding in our hands the proof that kindness could still cross the gap between them. The chief's gaze softened. He stepped forward, speaking in slow English, each word chosen carefully, like stones placed across a river. "You give life back," he said. "You know, take. This land, see that." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Words felt too small for what the moment asked. He reached for the bead still tied to my wrist, the one his grandson had given me, and his eyes glimmered when he saw it. A faint smile ghosted across his face. He spoke a few words to the boy, who nodded and whispered something in reply. Then Gray Eagle turned back to me and drew from his belt a small pouch. He opened it, took out a strip of leather with colored beads woven through, a bracelet, maybe, or a symbol. He fastened it around my wrist, next to the boy's bead. His hand lingered there for a moment, rough palm against my scarred skin. "Now you carry both sides," he said. "River need both banks to run." There was a silence between us, filled with wind and heartbeat. Behind him, I saw the younger warriors watching, wary but not angry. Curious, maybe. The air no longer felt like it might break. Then from far off came the faint echo of gunfire, a single crack carried on the wind. The chief turned his head sharply, eyes narrowing toward the distant ridge. My gut clenched. Town men. I knew that sound. Panic, ignorance. They always came quick after fear. "They're scared," I said quietly. "They think you're still here to fight." The chief's jaw tightened. His hand went to his knife, but didn't draw it. "No fight," he said. "Not today." He looked at me again, steady, resolute. "You tell them." I knew what he was asking, and I also knew what it might cost me. "I will," I said. So I walked out across that open stretch of grass, alone again between two worlds. The town men had gathered on the ridge, rifles in hand, faces red from fear and sun. Caleb Finch stood at the front, shouting something I couldn't hear. I raised both arms, walking slow, my hat in one hand. "Put your guns down," I called out. "The child's alive. They're leaving in peace." Caleb spat into the dirt. "You sure about that, Eli? Can't trust savages." I stopped a few yards short of him. "You don't have to trust them," I said softly. "Just trust me." He hesitated, eyes darting toward the hills where the warriors waited. The men behind him shifted uneasily. "War's done for the day," I said. "Let's stay that way." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, one by one, the rifles lowered. A wind passed through the grass, soft, forgiving. When I turned back, I saw the warriors watching. The chief raised his hand in salute, not to me alone, but to the idea of peace itself. And then they began to move, slow and solemn, a long procession heading toward the setting sun. I stood there watching them go until the dust swallowed their silhouettes. The last to leave was Gray Eagle. He paused at the edge of the ridge, turned his horse halfway, and spoke one last word over the wind. "Tohi." Then he was gone. Silence fell again. A deep, endless silence that filled the spaces inside me I hadn't known were hollow. When I went back to the barn, the boy's small blanket still lay folded on the floor. Jasper sniffed it at once, whined softly, then lay down beside it. The place felt emptier than before, but also cleaner, like something heavy had been lifted from its beams. That evening, I sat by the door watching the last of the fires fade on the horizon. The sun was gone, but its memory lingered, painting the world in shades of rose and amber. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. I thought the chief's words, "River need both banks to run." Maybe that's what life was, not choosing a side, but learning how to stand in the water between them. I looked down at my wrist, at the beads glowing faintly in the firelight, red and blue against my skin. A promise. A reminder. The wind picked up again, carrying faint echoes, laughter maybe, or song. It could have been imagination, or the prairie remembering. The night deepened. Stars came out slow, cautious. Before I went inside, I whispered a small prayer, not the kind I used to say, asking for mercy or forgiveness, but the kind that only thanks the quiet moments for still existing. And then, just as I was about to close the barn door, I saw something move on the far ridge, a lone figure on horseback, motionless, watching. Even from that distance, I knew it was Gray Eagle. The moonlight caught the silver of his hair. He lifted his hand once, a farewell, or maybe a warning, and then vanished into the dark. The boy's voice echoed faintly in my memory, "Tohi." Weeks would pass before I learned what that word meant. Peace. Simple, fragile, holy. And as I sat there in the dim lantern light, I realized something. Peace doesn't come like thunder. It comes like dawn, slow, quiet, unnoticed, until one day you find it sitting beside you, asking if you remember its name. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. No ghosts, no war, no silence too heavy to bear. Just the sound of the prairie breathing steady and the soft hum of the world forgiving itself. The land fell silent again. But this time, it was the silence of peace, not fear. The land fell silent again, but this time, it was the silence of peace, not fear. For weeks after the riders vanished, the days passed like soft-spoken prayers. The sun rose pale and gentle. The wind carried no scent of gunpowder or grief. My barn, once a place of hiding and hurt, became a place of healing. Neighbors came around, slow and curious, pretending to check on cattle or borrow tools. But really, they came to ask about the boy and the warriors. I told them the truth, though not the whole of it. They wanted a story they could carry to town, one that ended with a white man saving the child. But that wasn't what had happened. What had happened was simpler, harder, truer. Two people met in mercy, and the land decided to remember it. Some nights I'd catch the faint echo of drums far out on the plains. Not angry, not mourning, just calling. Maybe a ceremony, maybe memory itself beating in rhythm with the heart of the earth. Jasper would lift his head, ears pricked, and I'd whisper to him, "They're still out there, old boy. Still watching." The bracelet on my wrist never left me. Its colors had dulled with dust and work, but every time the light hit it just right, I'd see them glow, red for courage, blue for peace, white for the truth that lives between. I thought that was the end of it, but the prairie rarely lets a story sleep forever. It was near harvest time when the next chapter found me. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, not the swift, fierce silhouette of a warrior, but slow, deliberate. The horse was tired. The man leaned heavy in the saddle. As he drew near, I saw blood darkening his shirt. I stepped forward, rifle in hand, habit, not hatred, but when he raised his head, I saw the beadwork on his collar. I knew that pattern. Gray Eagle, I breathed. He swayed once, then slid from his horse. I caught him before he hit the ground. The old chief's breath came ragged. His eyes, though clouded by pain, still held that calm, endless light like water that seemed too much to ever be frightened again. "White man, friend," he murmured. "They come, soldiers. They take land again. They burn." His words broke apart with the wind. I carried him inside, laid him on the same cot where his grandson once lay. He gripped my wrist, fingers pressing into the beads. "Keep the boy safe. If he comes." "I will," I said. "I swear it." He closed his eyes. The breath left him in a single soft sigh, as though carried gently out the door by the prairie itself. Outside, thunder rolled. Not the kind from clouds, the kind that rode on horses' hooves. Through the dust I saw them, a company of soldiers, their flag snapping sharp in the wind. Blue coats, brass buttons. Young faces already hard from orders they didn't understand. They came up fast, voices shouting, eyes wild. Their leader, a clean-shaven lieutenant, barked, "You seen any natives pass this way?" I looked at the still form on the cot. "No," I said quietly. He studied me, suspicion flickering. "We heard a band cross near here. They burned a camp. Took cattle." I met his gaze. "You sure it wasn't the other way around?" He frowned, but said nothing. Then his eyes caught the bracelet on my wrist. "What's that?" "Gift," I said. "For saving a life." He smirked. "Wrong side to be saving, old man." I didn't answer. The rifle was leaning against the doorframe. My hand twitched once toward it, then stopped. Sometimes peace costs more than war. They left after a few minutes, spitting dust in their wake. The chief's body lay still, the light gone from his eyes, but not from the room. I buried him under the cottonwood by the creek, the way the earth itself seemed to ask. That night, I built a small fire near the grave and sat there till dawn, listening to the frogs and the whisper of grass. At first light, I heard hoofbeats again, lighter, hesitant. A boy rode up, barely taller than the saddle horn. I knew him even before I saw the face. Little Hawk. He dismounted, looking at the mound of fresh earth. His lips trembled, but no tears fell. He looked at me, eyes older than a child should be. "He said you would come," I whispered. He nodded once. Then he reached into his bag and took out a small feather tied with leather. Without a word, he placed it on the grave. We stood there a long while, two souls bound by loss, the wind carrying our silence like a prayer. When the sun climbed high, he turned to me. "I go north," he said softly, "to my mother's people. I wanted to tell him to stay, to let me teach him to mend fences, break horses, plant seed. But I saw in his eyes the same fire that once burned in mine, the need to find where his own story began. So I only said, the world's cruel sometimes, but not always." He smiled, a faint, brave thing. Then he looked toward the horizon, where the grass shimmered gold. "River need both banks to run," he said. Then he rode away. I never saw him again. Years passed. The world changed in small, stubborn ways. Railroads came, cutting through the wild heart of the plains. Towns grew fat with noise. Folks forgot what silence used to mean. But I stayed. Every evening, I'd walk down to that cottonwood, sit beside the grave, and talk to the wind. Sometimes, when the light was right, I could almost hear laughter again, a child's voice chasing a dog across the meadow, the echo of hooves like thunder far and kind. The bracelet never left my wrist. Even when my hands grew thin and my hair turned the color of winter, I kept it close. One night, when the moon was low and the coyotes sang like lost souls finding their way home, I felt a calm come over me, a warmth in the air, as if the land itself was leaning in to listen. And in that hush, I heard the chief's voice again, deep, patient, unbreaking. "You carry both sides." I smiled. My eyes closed. The fire cracked, slow and steady. When morning came, the prairie lay quiet, dew shining like beads of glass on every blade of grass. They say the next traveler who passed that way found the barn empty, the door open, the dog waiting at the steps. No man inside, just a folded note on the table. It read, "If anyone asks where I went, tell them I followed the river. Some say on still nights, if you stand near the cottonwood, you'll hear two voices, one deep, one young, speaking softly in a language the wind remembers. And sometimes, when the dawn breaks gold across the hills, a single hawk circles above the barn, crying out once before vanishing into the sun. Maybe that's just an old tale. Or maybe the land remembers what the heart cannot forget. Either way, that's how peace lives on out here. Not in treaties or tombstones, but in kindness that leaves footprints even after the wind has taken your name. If this story found its way to your heart tonight, if it reminded you that mercy still matters, even in a world made of dust and thunder, then don't ride away just yet. Take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to Wild West Tales, where every story is a whisper from the past meant to remind us of who we still are. Tell me, friend, from where are you watching tonight? Under what sky are you hearing this story? Because no matter how far apart we are, we're all listening to the same wind.